Most men chase success their whole lives. Einstein said that's exactly why they fail. His greatest lessons. We ignore them until it's too late. We were told to study hard, work harder, and success would follow. But Einstein believed the real answers to life were never taught in school. He wasn't just a scientist. He was a philosopher of the human soul, a man who found clarity in chaos, wisdom in silence, and meaning in the unseen. Today, we uncover the timeless truths he left behind. Not formulas or theories, but life lessons, powerful, profound, and too often realized when it's already too late. These are the lessons every man must learn before time runs out. Life lesson number 1: try not to become a man of success, rather become a man of value. I still remember the day I got promoted to vice president. I was 42. I had worked my whole life for that moment, late nights, missed birthdays, constant pressure to prove myself. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my new suit. My wife gave me a proud smile. My kids didn't really get it, they just asked if I'd be home for dinner. I told them probably not. And I wasn't. That night, I stayed late at the office, again. And on the way home, stuck in traffic, something strange hit me. I wasn't happy. Not the kind of happy I thought I'd be. I had chased success for over 20 years, the promotions, the paycheck, the recognition. And yet, there was this emptiness. A quiet voice in me asked, "What exactly have you built, other than a resume?" Einstein once said, "Try not to become a man of success, rather become a man of value." I read that quote years ago, but I never really heard it, not until I started losing the things that actually mattered. My father passed away a year later. At his funeral, no one talked about his career. They talked about how he helped neighbors without being asked. How he gave second chances to people who didn't deserve them. How he made everyone feel seen. He was a man of value. But I had become a man of success. Maybe you've been there, too. You spent your prime years grinding, climbing, sacrificing. And now, you're wondering, what did it all lead to? Don't get me wrong, success is not evil. But it's hollow when it's only measured by status or wealth. Because the world doesn't remember titles. It remembers the way you treated people, the lives you lifted, the kindness you gave without expecting a return. Success is what we chase when we're young. Value is what we become, when we understand what really lasts. Since then, I've changed how I live. I say yes to dinner with my kids, even if the emails are piling up. I volunteer at a local shelter. I call old friends. I write letters to people I admire, just to say thank you. And you know what? That feeling of emptiness I used to carry, it's no longer there. In the last lesson, we talked about how failure isn't the end, giving up is. But here's the thing, what you choose to chase matters just as much. So I'll ask you this: are you building a life that people will admire? Or are you just building a life that looks impressive on paper? In the next lesson, we'll talk about the quiet power of persistence and why staying curious may be the most valuable trait you'll ever carry into old age. Because sometimes, value isn't loud. It's patient. And it waits for us to notice. Life lesson number 2, life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. There was a time in my early 50s when I felt completely stuck. The kids had grown up and moved out. My career had slowed down. Promotions stopped coming. And every morning felt the same: wake up, pour coffee, stare out the window, and wonder, is this it? It was like someone had hit the pause button on my life. I wasn't unhappy, exactly. Just still. And too much stillness, I've learned, is dangerous. Because when we stop moving, we start sinking slowly, quietly, and we don't even notice until it feels too late. Einstein's words came back to me one day: Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But think about it, a bike only stays upright when it's in motion. Stop pedaling, and you fall. Not right away. Not dramatically. But little by little, you tip. I met a man once 68 years old who had just learned how to paint. He picked up a brush for the first time after retirement. "I've always loved colors," he said, "but I never gave myself permission to try." Now, every day, he paints landscapes from memory: the lake he swam in as a kid, the field behind his old school, the face of his late wife. There was so much life in his eyes when he spoke. So much movement in his soul. And that's when I understood, movement doesn't mean hustle. It doesn't mean chasing more money or staying busy just to feel productive. It means growing. Trying new things. Learning. Exploring. Even if it's small. Maybe you've slowed down, too. Maybe you're feeling like your best years are behind you. But I promise you they're not. Balance comes from motion. And motion comes from choosing something to lean into. Even a 5-minute walk. A conversation with someone new. Or a project you've always pushed aside. Because the moment you move even just a little, life starts flowing again. And you begin to feel like you again. In the last lesson, we talked about the difference between success and value, how real worth comes not from what you own, but from how you live. This lesson builds on that truth: to live with value, you must keep moving toward it. And in the next lesson, we'll explore the difference between being clever and being wise. Because solving problems is one thing. But avoiding them in the first place? That's a whole other kind of wisdom. Life lesson number 3. A clever person solves a problem. A wise person avoids it. I used to think being clever was the goal. In my 30s and 40s, I prided myself on being the guy who could fix anything. Broken machines. Office mistakes. Family drama. I was the problem solver, the one people called when something went wrong. And honestly, it felt good. It made me feel useful. Respected. But over time, I noticed something: the problems never stopped. In fact, they kept repeating, just with new faces, new details. It was like running on a treadmill that never slowed down. One night, I stayed late at the office cleaning up a mess someone else made. Missed another dinner. My wife had already gone to bed when I got home. I sat there in the dark, shoes still on, and realized I was tired. Not just physically, but emotionally. Tired of always saving the day. That's when I read that quote from Einstein: "A clever person solves a problem. A wise person avoids it." And it hit me hard. I had spent decades solving but never really learning. Never stepping back to ask, why do these problems keep showing up in the first place? What patterns am I ignoring? What boundaries am I not setting? A good friend of mine, Mike, taught me something I wish I knew sooner. He's not flashy. He doesn't try to impress. But he's peaceful, calm in a way that makes you stop and wonder. One day I asked him, "You always seem so steady. What's your secret?" He smiled and said, "I don't go where trouble waits. I say no early, so I don't have to fix things later." Simple as that. He wasn't solving messes. He was avoiding them with foresight, with clarity, with quiet strength. You see, cleverness is about reaction. Wisdom is about prevention. Clever people jump into chaos and fix it. Wise people don't walk into chaos to begin with. And that wisdom, it comes with age. With a few scars. With enough long nights to finally say, I don't need to be the hero anymore. I just want peace. In our last lesson, we talked about movement, how to keep going when life feels stuck. But the direction you move in matters, too. Don't just move fast. Move wisely. In the next lesson, we'll talk about change, why it's not intelligence that defines you, but your ability to let go, and grow. Because the most dangerous thing you can do is believe that staying the same is safe. Life lesson number 4. The measure of intelligence is the ability to change. There was a time in my life not too long ago when I thought I had it all figured out. I had routines, habits, beliefs I clung to like a life jacket. The same breakfast every morning. The same route to work. The same opinions about how the world worked, what was right, and who I was supposed to be. It made me feel safe. Like if I just stuck to the script, nothing could go wrong. But life doesn't care much for our scripts. The real shift started after I turned 50. My youngest daughter sat me down one day and said, "Dad, you don't really listen. You just wait for your turn to talk." She wasn't angry, just honest. And it stung more than I'd like to admit. That night, I couldn't sleep. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I had stopped learning. Stopped listening. I thought being older meant being wiser, but I wasn't changing, just repeating. That's when I came across Einstein's words, "The measure of intelligence is the ability to change." And I realized, intelligence isn't about knowing the most. It's about being open enough to unlearn, too. Think about it. The people we admire most in life, they grow. They bend. They evolve with time, instead of fighting it. But so many of us, especially after 40, we get stuck. Not because we can't change, but because we won't. We hold on to ideas that no longer serve us. We defend behaviors that hurt the people we love. We say, "That's just who I am," instead of asking, "Who could I become?" I've seen marriages fall apart because someone refused to adapt. I've seen people lose jobs not because they weren't smart, but because they didn't want to learn something new. But I've also seen the beauty of change. A friend of mine went back to college at 60. He said, "I felt dumb in class. But I felt alive again." He's now mentoring younger students and he's never looked back. Change isn't weakness. It's strength. It takes courage to say, "I was wrong. I've grown. I'm not the same man I was 10 years ago, and that's a good thing." In the last lesson, we talked about the wisdom of avoiding problems before they begin. This one goes deeper. Sometimes, the problem is us. And the solution is becoming someone new. In the next lesson, we'll explore the difference between knowledge and experience and why books may teach you facts, but only life teaches you truth. Because change starts in the mind, but it grows in the heart. Life lesson number 5. The only source of knowledge is experience. I used to think I was smart because I read a lot. I had books stacked on my nightstand, articles bookmarked, podcasts playing on my drive to work. And for a while, I believed that made me wise because I knew things. I could quote facts, explain concepts, even debate politics over dinner. But one day, that illusion cracked. My son called me, upset. He had just lost his first job. He said, "Dad, I feel like a failure." And I responded the only way I knew how, with advice. I told him about growth mindset, about resilience, about how rejection is just redirection. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Have you ever actually been fired?" I hadn't. And that's when I realized all the knowledge I gave him was empty. Because I hadn't felt what he was feeling. I hadn't lived it. Einstein said, "The only source of knowledge is experience." And it's true. What we know matters. But what we've lived, that's what teaches us who we are. I once met a man at a small town diner in Arizona. He was maybe in his late 70s, sipping black coffee, flipping through a worn-out journal. We got to talking, and he told me stories not about big achievements, but about simple moments. Like holding his wife's hand during her last breath. Or losing his farm in a drought, and starting over from nothing. He didn't speak like a scholar, but every word he said carried weight, because it came from a place books can't reach experience. And now, in my 50s, I understand this more deeply. You can read about grief, but until you've lost someone, you don't know grief. You can study marriage, but until you've had to forgive someone who hurt you, you don't know love. You can learn about risk, but until you've put everything on the line, you don't know courage. Life doesn't hand out wisdom in pages. It gives it to you in scars, in silence, in small victories. And every moment, even the painful ones, are lessons in disguise. In the last lesson, we talked about the power of change, how growth requires letting go of who you were. This lesson adds something deeper. True growth comes when life moves from your head to your heart. And in the next lesson, we'll talk about imagination and why it's not just for children. Because intelligence gives us tools, but imagination gives us direction. Because sometimes, the greatest lessons come not from what we know but from what we feel. Life lesson number 6. Imagination is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited. When I was younger, I believed knowledge was everything. If you had the facts, the degrees, the logic, the numbers, you were ahead. I worked hard to be the smartest person in the room. I read manuals before trying new things. I checked the data before making decisions. I didn't trust what I couldn't explain. And honestly, that mindset got me far, at least in the practical world. But something changed as I got older. It started with my grandson. He was 6 at the time, full of questions, full of wild ideas. One day, he asked me, "Grandpa, do you think trees talk to each other when we're not around?" I laughed and started to explain the biology of plants, but he stopped me. He said, No, I don't mean that. I mean really talk. Like best friends." I didn't know what to say. Because in that moment, I realized I had lost that part of me. The part that wondered. That dreamed without needing permission. That saw magic in things I couldn't prove. Einstein once said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited." And now, I understand. Knowledge can tell you how the stars burn. Imagination helps you reach them. Knowledge can build a house. Imagination makes it home. Knowledge says what is. Imagination asks, what could be? We live in a world that praises logic. But some of the most important decisions in life, who to love, where to go, what to believe in, aren't made with facts. They're made with faith, vision, and imagination. I've met men who never took chances because they only trusted what they knew. And I've met others, maybe less educated, maybe less smart, but they dreamed big. They risked. They imagined a better life and chased it even if they failed a few times. And you know what? They were alive in a way that logic alone can't explain. In the last lesson, we explored how experience is the truest teacher. This one adds a spark. It's not just what life teaches you. It's what you dare to believe beyond what life shows you. And in the next lesson, we'll look at solitude, why being alone isn't always loneliness, and how silence can become one of life's greatest companions. Because the older we get, the more we realize, it's not just about what we know. It's about what we still dream. Life lesson number 7. I live in that solitude which is painful in youth, but delicious in the years of maturity. There was a time in my life when I couldn't stand being alone. In my 20s and 30s, I always needed noise, music, conversation, the television playing in the background. Even silence made me restless. It felt like something was missing, like I wasn't living unless I was surrounded by people or distractions. I thought loneliness was something to run from. And maybe back then, it was. But now, in my 50s, I've grown to love the quiet. I remember one Sunday morning not long ago. My wife had gone to visit her sister. The house was still, no kids running around anymore, no phone buzzing. Just me, a cup of coffee, and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. For the first few minutes, I felt that old discomfort creeping in. But then, something shifted. I looked out the window and noticed how the sunlight fell across the yard. I remembered the tree we planted when our daughter was born. I sat there, not rushing anywhere, and felt for the first time in a long time completely at peace. Einstein wrote, "I live in that solitude which is painful in youth, but delicious in the years of maturity." And I couldn't agree more. When you're young, solitude feels like rejection. Like the world is moving on without you. But as you grow older, solitude becomes something else. It becomes a place of reflection. A space to breathe. A quiet room where your thoughts finally have room to stretch out. Most people don't realize this until later in life, when the kids leave, when the parties stop, when the job isn't so loud anymore. At first, that silence feels heavy. But if you sit with it long enough, it starts to feel like home. Because in that space, you begin to hear the parts of yourself you used to ignore. You remember who you were before life got so busy. You forgive yourself for the mistakes you made along the way. And you begin to appreciate the simple things: a warm cup of tea, a walk in the evening, the sound of your own breath. In the last lesson, we talked about imagination, how it gives us the freedom to dream, even when life feels small. This lesson teaches us something just as powerful: you don't always need more noise to feel alive. Sometimes, stillness is the doorway to meaning. And in the next lesson, we'll explore a deeper truth: why how you live matters more than what you achieve, and why the happiest lives are often the quietest ones. Because solitude isn't emptiness. It's presence without performance. And it's a gift that only gets better with age. Life lesson number 8. Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile. There was a moment in my late 40s that I still think about often. I was standing in the checkout line at the grocery store, rushing through my day, when I noticed an older man behind me. He had a few items in his cart: bread, soup, some fruit, and he looked tired. Not just physically. His eyes were heavy in a different way. Something in me paused. And without thinking too much, I told the cashier, "Put his things on my bill." He looked at me, surprised. Then he smiled, not wide, just soft. Like no one had done something like that in a long time. We didn't speak much. But as I walked to my car, I felt something shift inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. That night, I sat with my wife and told her what happened. She asked, "Why did you do it?" And I said, "I don't know. I just felt like I needed to." But deep down, I did know. I was tired of living for myself. We spend so much of life chasing things for us: a better job, a nicer home, a bigger bank account. And while there's nothing wrong with those goals, they start to feel empty if you're the only one benefiting. Einstein once said, "Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile." And I believe that. Because the moments I remember most, the ones that truly stayed with me, aren't the ones where I won, or earned, or proved something. They're the moments where I gave. Where I listened. Where I showed up when it wasn't convenient. Where I made someone else feel seen. I think as we get older, we begin to understand this more. We've already tasted success. We've already gathered the things we thought would make us happy. And yet, the real joy, the deep, quiet kind, comes when we reach beyond ourselves. It's in comforting a friend who's grieving. In teaching someone younger without needing praise. In making a stranger's day just a little lighter. You don't have to fix the world. But you can make a corner of it a little warmer. In the last lesson, we talked about solitude, how being alone can be a gift. But here's the truth: even in solitude, we're still part of something bigger. This next lesson will go even deeper into how we choose to live, and why tying your life to a goal, not a person or possession, might be the path to true peace. Because when you live for others, you don't just change their life, you transform your own. Life lesson number 9. If you want to live a happy life, tie it to a goal, not to people or things. There was a time in my life when I tied my happiness to everything outside of me. My career, my marriage, my kids' achievements, even the car I drove. If things were going well, I felt on top of the world. But if one piece slipped, a bad quarter at work, a disagreement at home, a missed opportunity, I felt like my entire world was falling apart. It was like standing on a raft built from other people's approval. And the moment someone shifted, I lost balance. Then, one day, it all changed. A close friend of mine, someone I had known since college, got laid off unexpectedly. His kids were off at school, his wife was always busy, and suddenly, he had nowhere to go in the mornings. No meetings, no titles, no deadlines. Just space and silence. I called him a week later and asked, "How are you doing?" He said something I'll never forget: "I've realized I never had a life. I just had roles to play." That hit me like a brick. Because I saw myself in him. Living day to day, not with purpose but with attachment. To people. To things. To an image of who I thought I needed to be. Einstein once said, "If you want to live a happy life, tie it to a goal, not to people or things." And as I've gotten older, I've come to understand that deeply. People change. They grow. They drift. Sometimes, they leave. And things. They break. They lose value. They fade. But a goal lives inside you. It doesn't depend on anyone else. It gives you something to wake up for, to reach toward even on the hard days. For me, that goal became simple: to live a life that feels honest. To speak gently. To create something meaningful. To leave behind a little more light than I found. It's not flashy. It won't earn applause. But it keeps me grounded. And more importantly, it keeps me happy in a quiet, steady kind of way. In our last lesson, we talked about living for others, how giving brings meaning. This lesson builds on that, because to give well, you need to be anchored in something deeper than people or possessions. And in the next lesson, we'll explore a truth most men ignore until it's too late: why the future isn't something to fear, but something to prepare for, with intention. Because when your life is tied to something within, you stop being tossed by everything outside. And that is freedom. Life lesson number 10. I never think of the future. It comes soon enough. I used to be obsessed with the future. In my 30s and 40s, every day felt like a checklist for what might come next. Saving for retirement. Planning the next promotion. Worrying about the kids' college, the mortgage, my health. I thought I was being responsible, and in some ways, I was. But if I'm being honest, I wasn't living. I was preparing to live. Always one step ahead in my mind, but never fully present in the moment. Then something happened that shifted everything. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was in the backyard with my dad. He was 78 at the time, sitting quietly in a lawn chair, sipping lemonade. I asked him, "Do you ever worry about what's next?" He smiled and said, "Son, I spent so much time planning for the future that I missed most of my present. Now that the future's here, all I want is this breeze, this sunlight, and 5 more minutes to enjoy it." That stayed with me. Later that week, I came across a quote from Einstein: "I never think of the future. It comes soon enough." And it finally made sense. Because no matter how much you plan, how much you worry, the future always shows up different than you expected, faster than you're ready for. Don't get me wrong, planning has its place. But living only happens now. We don't get to replay today. We don't get to hug someone later. We don't get to say I love you in yesterday's silence. How many moments have we missed because we were looking too far ahead? These days, I try to slow down. I water the plants instead of rushing past them. I look my wife in the eyes when she talks. I say yes to a walk, even if I've got emails waiting. Because the future? It's not promised. But this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, it's real. And it's enough. In the last lesson, we talked about anchoring your life to a goal, something deep within you that brings quiet joy. This one reminds us that even a goal is only lived out one day at a time. In the next lesson, we'll explore a question I've asked myself many times: what really matters in the end? Because when you stop chasing what's next, you start seeing what's already here. And that's where life actually begins. As we get older, something shifts. We stop chasing noise. We stop needing to be right all the time. And slowly, quietly, we begin to search for meaning. Not in the big, dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones. A quiet morning. A shared laugh. A lesson we finally understand, not with our minds, but with our hearts. Albert Einstein wasn't just a man of science. He was a man who saw life for what it is, and what it could be. And his words remind us of something many men only realize too late: that wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about living with awareness, with courage, and with heart. So today, I invite you not just to remember these lessons, but to live them. Not tomorrow. Not next year. Now. Start small. Forgive someone. Say what you feel. Sit in silence. Or simply, breathe and be present. And if this video spoke to you, if even one line made you pause, I hope you'll stay on this journey with me. Bell subscribe for more stories like this, more timeless truths to guide your path. Thumbs up, leave a comment, share the lesson that touched you most. Outbox tray, send this to a friend who may need it more than you know. Because we all grow wiser, but it's better when we grow together.